So what has brought me to the Invisible Sun RPG? In this podcast, I want to share with you some of my impressions of the game, some of the rules mechanics, and some of the things that I feel make this a very, very unique role-playing game. And for me personally, someone that enjoys Dungeons & Dragons, someone who enjoys GURPS, along with a couple of more obscure RPGs like Paranoia or Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, this was a major shift for me, not only in setting, but as a game master, a really big shift in consciousness. And this has been building for a while for me, so it's interesting that I've kind of stumbled into the Invisible Sun, but I've been looking for something like this for a while to challenge the gaming group, but also to challenge my evolution as a DM, as a GM. And I've always felt that based on our player personalities, based on the narratives and the scripts that we enjoy, over time you will tend to gravitate towards a specific role-playing system. And even if you enjoy multiple systems, if I say right now, pull one off the shelf, you're going to run a game. What are you going to pull off the shelf? This fits and it works, but I believe there's also tremendous value or potential to regularly play another system or explore another system that's out there that is completely different from your primary, because it's going to give you an influx of new ideas. It's going to challenge your players with that. So moving into the Invisible Sun. The narrative itself, and I have to be careful here because I don't want to give away any spoilers, because a lot of the game, what's interesting right away as a game master, you'll have to excuse me if I say DM, I'm so used to saying DM, the GM and the players in a traditional role-playing game, or I should say a mainstream modern role-playing game, the GM has elite knowledge. The GM knows all the books, in theory, all the rules, the ins and outs of the gaming world, and the players might have some basic knowledge. They might have some extensive knowledge, but they're discovering about the actual gaming environment, whether that's Forgotten Realms, Mysteria, GURPS Modern, whatever that's going to be. Right away, Invisible Sun is interesting in that the players are coming out of this dreamlike state of what they believe was reality, and they're going to have a little bit of taste and character creation of those memories of the world they're now in, the world that they now inhabit. But so much massive, massive discovery along the way. At the same time, the GM has, of course, knowledge of the rules and the mechanics, but the world itself, there are some hidden reveals. There's some hidden stuff to be unlocked. You are learning about the world also as the GM. And this really this was very intriguing. This was a very, very intriguing concept, and I expect this to continue in future supplements and future releases. So there's kind of this unlock. I know a lot of board games like Gloomhaven embrace this, not only the legacy aspect of it, but also this idea that you open up hidden envelopes and you open up hidden information. Blackstone Fortress has this. So it's interesting to see where role-playing games, especially fantasy-based role-playing games that used to inspire board games, right? The Holy Grail, let's create an RPG experience into a board game, and we get something like Hero Quest or Descent First Edition or Gloomhaven. Well, now it's this influx is going the other way here. We have concepts from board gaming bleeding out and into role-playing games. Hidden knowledge, discoverable knowledge unlocks for the GM. Wow. So that I have to be careful with what I know so far of reading the game and playing a few sessions with the group in case you're thinking about running a campaign or getting involved with Invisible Sun. I'm going to leave that out. So spoiler free on here. Certainly the gaming universe itself is this kind of fusion between dreams and reality. It has a very surreal nature on it, and it's an interesting setting. I won't say it's 100% unique, but at this point, is anything really unique? What I like about it is it opens up the visuals of the GM and the visuals of the players to create their characters, to create challenges, to create encounters, and express them in any way that you want. This is a challenging concept. Kind of, if we look at it from the D&D perspective, and if you've been following my podcasts here for role-playing games and checking out my blog, you know that I love D&D. It's a massive part of my life. It's been a massive part of my life. So I'm just putting that out there because I'm going to be doing some hard comparisons between the two on there. D&D is very, very set in the rules, and especially depending on the edition. So if you are a wizard class, you kind of maybe look like this. You kind of act like that. You don't wear heavy armor. I mean, you could in D&D 3.x. I had a mage Tyrenius who he was going to wear heavy armor as part of his narrative, part of his background. But the game mechanics to do that and deal with spell failure meant the limited feats that I had to take for my character class as a wizard, I had to, rather than taking stuff like extended spell or spell penetration or ways to bypass magic resistance, I had to take light armor, medium armor, heavy armor. I had to take ways to reduce arcane failure. And half the time I wouldn't be able to cast my spells because of arcane failure. The way the rules of D&D are set up, they are somewhat restrictive. Well, that's because we have classes on there. And we have ways that appear. An elf, a dwarf, a half-orc. There are some variances in there in appearance, but, you know, if you're an elf, you kind of need those ears. So to project a role-playing game to Invisible Sun, where it's this kind of surreal setting, that opens up a lot. I think of it as like a fusion of 1920-ish tech, 1920 visuals, with a splash of Art Deco, with a splash of kind of gothic horror in there. It's not steampunk, but it's interesting. Okay, that's a refreshing narrative coming from someone myself that usually plays fantasy type games or sci-fi type games. That's kind of interesting. But moving on with that, the mechanics, they're solid. You know, it's the usual D10 skill check type thing. It works, and you have ways to modify the D10 to increase your ability or add more dice on there, and you have ways to expend energy pools. Okay, nothing super revolutionary there, but it's solid. The engine itself is solid. What really piqued my interest was the magic system. Now, this is a personal bias because I usually play wizards. I usually play magic users on there. If I'm playing sci-fi and you've got access to psionics, I'm there with the brainwaves. If I don't have access to psionics, then, sci-fi, then I'm playing some sort of techno mage on there. That's not to say I don't play fighters and thieves and things like that, but the focus is magic. And in Invisible Sun, you are essentially mages dedicated to a magical school of study on there, or taking a path that follows your own path, your own narrative on there. The magic system with how it casts and how it operates is very, very interesting, is very, very intriguing. And what it did was it made it not so much complex, but it made it put a lot of depth in there. And it brought that magic system, in my mind, in my experience, to both a tactical level. D&D, again, as a comparison, is mainly a tactical magical system. What type of damage can I deal? What type of radius can I deal? What type of effects can I deal? Yeah, I've got some charm person. Yeah, I've got hold person. Yeah, I've got some illusions on there. And if I cast an illusion spell, I maybe kind of say what it's going to be, and the DM rolls to see if you believe or disbelieve. I had a player once that anytime an opposing magic user cast an illusion, because I love illusion spells, I love trying to bend reality, he'd automatically, as a player, be like, I disbelieve. And I'm like, you can't disbelieve. I'm like, you as a human player know it's probably an illusion, but your first level fighter has no idea that this is an illusion. So you can't automatically disbelieve. But Invisible Sun has this wonderful narrative of not only dealing damage and stuff, but also really making magic three-dimensional, really giving it the ability to change the game, to manipulate the game, to affect the game without necessarily breaking the game. Yes, there are high-level spells that are going to be very, very powerful, but in theory, as a GM, by the time the players make it up to that level, you should have ways to counter it on there. But ultimately, I've found, and this isn't a criticism against IS, I found many games, almost all role-playing games at the highest level, you're at the extreme of the curve. I mean, they're very powerful, whatever you're going to be. So if you love a magical system, Invisible Sun has that down flawlessly. And I love magical systems. I love playing a mage and bringing that in on there. So we have that aspect. That certainly appealed to me. So setting, yeah, it's interesting, but there are a lot of interesting settings. Magic system, playing a magic user, as I think mages, sorcerers, magic users, whatever, that's awesome. Now, combining the two, this is where things get interesting with the creativity of the setting. I just said wizard. I just said magic user. I just said sorcerer. What does that conjure up? You are free to manifest the magic however you want. You are free to manifest the effects however you want. You could be a techno mage. You could be kind of the classical robes and beard Gandalf type mage on there. You could be a fusion of some sort of construct that is casting spells on there. Literally, character creation is off the hook with how you want to visually present that. My own character in the game, while he's humanoid in appearance, he's not really male. He's not really female on there. And he wears this kind of ivory white mask on his, well, we don't know if it's a mask or if it's real features. And he communicates through music. He winds up a music box. And when he speaks, it comes through that music box. He communicates entirely through music and sound, and his spells are cast that way. So you can just kind of really go in any direction as you want, and there's never a no. From the DM's perspective, there is never a no. So let's look at the story itself. Let's look at how things run itself, because this is where things get interesting. The story arc is key to Invisible Sun. And in a lot of the promos that I see and a lot of the discussions, I understand a lot needs to be held back, not necessarily because it's trying to generate a hype machine to go out and do it, although that is the effect, but to hold back on some of these spoilers and some of these discoveries. So I'm walking that fine line. What I found intriguing with the mechanics from the GM's perspective, and this is where it's really easy to run a game, yet really intimidating on there. It's an interesting duality. The players, when they create their characters, have a story arc. There's a bunch of them, 15, 20, that they pick from. And I'm simplifying them. But it could be like, I'm going to get revenge on something. Or I'm going to do something amazing in the game. Or I'm going to create something in the game. I'm going to discover something. And the story arc has about 5 or 6 breaks in between levels that you can achieve on there. And the idea is you're going to take your character through the Invisible Sun game to resolve your personal story arc. When you do that, I won't say you win the game. It opens up another arc. You can gain arcs as you progress on there. I would imagine by the time you complete it, just from the few games that we've played, you're playing probably a year and a half. And at that point, you're probably ready to play a new character or explore a new character. Same way in D&D. You're going to hit level 20. Really, by the time you hit level 16 to 20, you've kind of been there and done that, and you're ready for another character on there. So I'm not worried about this idea like, well, where's the leveling up? You're not completing your story arc in like 4 or 5 gaming sessions. It's just not going to happen. But the idea is in creating this arc, now that's the adventure. That's the adventure. So we sit down to play, and the 4 or 5 characters, each one of their characters has their own kind of quest, their own kind of campaign that they've created. The player character has taken ownership. It's like you woke up, brave new world, crazy universe. What do you want to be? What do you want to do? How do you go about do that? Well, that's up to you on there. So I find as a GM where I'm like, I don't need GM notes. I don't need to prepare anything. I don't need to come up with an amazing, crazy story and generate tons of levels and bookkeeping and paperwork. I sit down and what are the players, what do you want to do? But this is where it's a little bit terrifying. As the players, from a GM perspective, as the players go through at the start of the gaming session, okay, my story arc is I'm going to get revenge on the Blind King. Who the Blind King is? I don't even really know yet, but I'm going to get revenge on there. So the first part of my story arc is I need to gain some clues, some contacts that could reveal the identity of the Blind King. So I'd say to the game master, the GM, I want to visit this place, or I want to move to here, or I want to research that. That is in game. We're role-playing that out, and we're meeting people, and we're dropping those little clues, those little hints on there. On the fly, as a GM, I need to be generating those NPCs. I need to be generating those places. I need to be figuring out what's going on in the moment. We're going to hold that thought for a second. So I find really what I need for this game is, rather than developing maps and quests and who's the big villain and this and that, I need to generate some interesting NPCs. And in a way, this is very refreshing because I'm playing the game with characters in there. I'm arbitrating the rules and figuring out what you can and can't do and what opportunities present themselves. But this is the first time that I really, really feel like I'm also playing the game. Maybe only at 60% or so, but wow, that's interesting from that perspective on there. Now we have the synergy of the other players. So the 3 or 4 of us are sitting down to play, and we have our story arcs. There might be some overlap. If I help you develop your arc, then you help me. We might have overlapping as the GM. This example, if I'm going to get revenge on the Blind King, and your arc is to create, Excalibur, essentially, or I don't know, maybe create a lightsaber. That leads us both to the one person, an artificer or something that can give you blueprints to make that object, or can also tell me about the Blind King on there. There's conflict. There's overlap. Maybe that artificer is only going to tell one of you it. So very, very intriguing from the GM perspective, where I don't know what to expect in gaming. I don't know where this story is going to go. I really don't on there. Every gaming session, besides being a lot less prep time, it's intriguing. It's curious. When we set this against an amazing magical system, when we set this against kind of this interesting backdrop on there, it's something very, very different. It's something very, very refreshing. So I spend my time now creating NPCs as opposed to massively tomed adventures. And that's not to say, I guess, you couldn't run a big adventure, but from what I see, the system just really doesn't seem to be set up that way. Now let's also talk about how the players help you as the GM, and maybe they're aware of it or they're not quite aware of it. And again, no spoilers here, because this is in character creation, and there's a couple of PDFs out there that illustrate character creation. This is from the Book of the Key, so I'm not giving away any of the other settings or secrets, because the way I chose to start the first game was literally we went through character creation, and you're in the universe. You're in the Invisible Sun. What does that mean? I'm telling you right now, we've created your character. Here you are. Where do you go? You have no idea of this new reality. So I've chosen to just thrust the players in, and they're discovering the unlocks at the same time I discover the unlocks, and the unlocks are happening because they are literally unlocking them. And that's intriguing also on there. So after you decide your abilities, your role, your spellcasting school, your story arc, a couple of other abilities in there, your house. Your house. It takes place in this city, which is recovering from a long war. Things are being rebuilt. Things are abandoned and being reclaimed on there. You are returning to your house. You get your house. What does that house look like? That's up to you to decide. And it could be something as abstract where you just describe it, or one of my players who's an architect, he's literally creating and drafting his house. This house serves as a base of operations. It serves and gives you some abilities. You can upgrade it as you go on there, but it provides a hook. It provides an adventure hook based on how you describe it, what's in there, what's going on, and the neighborhood that it's in. You're giving me seeds as the GM that I can now combine with your story arc to pull stuff in. And after you've created your house, this is session 0, the other players get to decide the neighbors around you. And they kind of describe, they give a couple of ideas. Each player gives an idea of like, okay, this is your house. Who's the neighbor to your left? Who's the neighbor to your right? They describe that a little bit, and everyone kind of takes a vote and decides. I record that as a GM, this organic, literal mini world building, which I'm just filing away for the adventure hooks with the NPCs with your story arc. That's it's a lot of freedom for the GM, yet at the same time, it's a lot of responsibility because in that moment, you got to kind of make it up, figure it out, see what you're doing on there. Something vastly different than some of my other campaigns in D&D. Something vastly different with how things operate in other games. So the cube itself, and there's videos online that show the contents of the cube. You've got this kind of tarot deck that influences things. You've got a 6-fingered hand, and you've got handouts and some premium items on there. It's a fine line. You know, I've seen criticism saying, well, look, an RPG should just be a book, and that's it. Do you need all this other premium bling and stuff? And it's like a 35-pound cube, literally, that you need to bring on there. Well, I say, look, you could play a role-playing game just with that, you know, with a book, but a lot of role players, and you can tell me if you're right or wrong, myself included, you got a lot of extra stuff. If you look at D&D, when you play D&D, you've got the books, at least for me. We've got the books, we've got miniatures. At a minimum, we've got the rollout dry erase maps. Sometimes we use terrain. We've got different dice sets. We've got premium dice sets. I've got organizers with tokens and glass beads or wooden cubes for counters on things on there. There's a lot of other little bling. There's more bling that's possible than you need. Invisible Sun has this, but the bling is premium in that it ties into the game and helps add to the atmosphere, but it also visually sets the mood for the game. And there are these cards that represent, I guess the best way to describe it without giving it away, the winds of magic. So as you go through the game, at different points as things shift, you literally flip over this random card on there. And it changes that mythos in the moment. So for the players, for someone that's a power gamer, a meta gamer who's been stacking their dice and getting their spells ready, it could enhance them and make them even more broken. Or it could now shift it where they have to change their plans. For someone that's more narrative driven and trying to resolve their arc and their story, now you're going to flip this card. It changes the winds of magic, and they're saying, wow, look at this, a new opportunity. From the perspective of the GM, I flip that card. I'm a little bit nervous. I'm a little bit excited because something is going to change, and it's going to introduce a new kind of flavor, a new direction of the magical winds. I need to roll with that as the GM. I need to be on my toes there. And it's also a sense of wonderment in that, I don't know, what are we going to get? Maybe it's the chaotic neutral in me. Let's see what we're going to get on there. So there's a lot of little pieces with how it brings it in and how it ties it in that is very, very, very intriguing with that, with the theme. So is this the mainstream role-playing game? Is it just going to be a blip on the radar and fade away? Is it going to be something that, like my buddy that's still playing a vampire game, like literally for like 15 years going on there? Is it something that's going to be totally self-contained in like a die-hard community? I don't really know. There's a lot of interesting innovations. There's a lot of interesting ideas behind it. And certainly it is a shift in consciousness for the possibility of role-playing games, true co-op games. And this leads us back to the beginning, the circular nature of the Invisible Sun. We saw early on role-playing games in the 70s and the 80s like D&D that influenced board games, where board games tried to capture that RPG experience. Well, now we have board games pushing into the RPG experience on there. Board games influencing it. So many board games right now are co-op driven. The idea that it's the players against the system, and there might be someone that controls some of the elements in the system. An example, Zombicide Invader, Zombicide Black Plague. Okay, it's simplistic, but I love the theme. It works. It's you against the game, but usually you have someone nominated to do the spawns and move the miniatures and resolve the attacks on there and keep track of the turn, who's going what. Obviously, Invisible Sun is more complex, but I feel like I'm playing a co-op RPG experience even when I'm the GM, and I have never experienced that before in a setting for me that's magic, blasting out that magic, that has mystery, that has discovery, and has this kind of unlockable content and unlockable ability. It is very, very intriguing. It is something very, very different and definitely pushing me as a GM.